Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karva Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvisavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us. May He sustain us. May we grow in strength together. May our study together be fruitful. And may we not hate one another. Om peace, peace, peace. Okay, good evening. We are just starting now part 2, chapter 3 of the Katha Upanishad. So the first verse says that this world is like a big banyan tree that is rooted high above in Brahman and has its branches such as men and women, animals, insects, and plants spread out below. Yet the phenomenal world is timeless in the sense that it comes and goes again and again, like waves, in other words, in cycles. And the root of this tree is Brahman. It is pure and, they say, immortal. All the worlds, including this planet, rest on it. Nothing can surpass it. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. So this world is being compared to a banyan tree. An ordinary tree has its root below and its branches above. But this tree has its branches below and its root above. We cannot see that root, however. Where is it? That root is in Brahman. At first, Brahman was not manifest. Later, it manifested itself as this world. The branches of this tree, that is the animate and inanimate world, are all we see, and they were originally in Brahman. Like a banyan tree, this world is also perishable. It changes, but it does not go out of existence altogether. It comes and goes in cycles. And in that sense, it continues and is eternal. No one knows when this tree first appeared or when it will totally disappear. The root of this tree, however, is Brahman, and that is unchanging and unchangeable. It is always the same. Nothing can affect it. It is pure and immortal. All things in this world are under the shelter of Brahman, and nothing can exist independent of it. So this world, this universe, it has its foundation in Brahman, and then expresses itself as universe as all the individual beings, plants, animals, insects, people, and so forth. But within all those beings is Brahman. And in order to understand this, we have to understand that by creation, when we talk about God and creation, it's not as if God created something, an object separate from himself, and then he stuck it out there, and now he's kind of running it. This whole universe is contained within the consciousness of God. When they talk of Brahman, the God, the ultimate reality, they define it as Sat Chit Ananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. And that the entire universe and all the beings in it were all contained within the consciousness of Brahman. Now Brahman himself is not actually the creator. As we mentioned before, when you speak of God as the creator, you're speaking of God in terms of something that he does. It's like you say a certain person is a teacher. But in the evening, that teacher, he goes home and he just sits around, watches TV or something. He's not a teacher at all. He's just at home being himself. And same way when the Brahman actually is just God sitting at home being himself, being God. When he think in terms of his activity of the creation of the universe, that's only like a small portion. They say that this entire universe is just like a tiny drop in the infinite nature of Brahman. And when they speak of the universe, or the creation of the universe, you had that one consciousness connected with Maya, with the power to create, and out of that comes the universe. Now, the important thing to understand from our standpoint, what this means to us, is that consciousness, which is creating the whole universe, out of which the whole universe has come, that consciousness is actually our consciousness. Because that consciousness is the consciousness, the only consciousness there is. It's like right now, as an individual, as a human being, we're like a wave in the ocean. But underlying the wave is the water of the ocean. And the waves come and go. They may be big waves or little waves, and eventually they go. But underlying the waves is the water which never goes. In the same way, right now, our consciousness as a human being is consciousness connected with a particular body and a particular mind. And we take on this sense of individuality. I'm this particular person, and I have this particular physical body. I have all this mind full of different opinions and attitudes and experiences and things, and this personality, and this is me. But when a person begins to go deeper, when he begins to explore within his own self, and he begins to ask the question, well, who am I really? Am I just this body? Am I just this mind? Then he begins, eventually, reaches a point where he discovers, I'm pure consciousness. And when you reach that point, that I'm just a pure consciousness, not connected with a particular body or a particular mind or a particular individual, when I discover that I'm that consciousness, then I discover that consciousness, the thing within me which is saying, I exist, this is me, I'm here, that consciousness is actually Brahman consciousness, is the pure Chit. And so within each individual is the entire reality, infinite reality of God Himself. The problem is that we shut ourselves off from that. We block it out, and then we struggle in the world. We try to accomplish things. We have a little happiness, a little unhappiness, and a little success, a little failure. And like that, we live a very kind of small, limited human existence, completely blocking out the presence of the all-powerful, all-wise, all-loving, all-good divine being that's there within us as our own innermost nature. And so in the spiritual life and in the ancient scriptures in India, like Katha Upanishad, these ancient sages, they had discovered, this reality is there within me and within everybody else. And that reality is there for everybody, but it has to be discovered. And this is what spiritual practices, things like meditation and so forth, is really trying to remove all the barriers, the clouds that block the sun, trying to remove those out of the way so that we can discover the reality which is already there and which is always there. And so this verse is saying that really behind everything, behind every insect, every animal, every human being, all the gods, the goddesses, everything is that one reality. When the various gods and goddesses like Indra and others, they're like very powerful cosmic beings. But yet in mythology, sometimes you'll find that a sage who's realized his oneness with Brahman is often more powerful than Indra, because that presence of Brahman is the ultimate power behind everything that happens. The more we shut it out, the smaller, the more limited, and so forth we become. The more we allow it to come in, then the more kind of creative, the more powerful we become. However, the power of God is not something that we can use. A lot of people will pray to God, please God, give me this or give me that or do this or do that. The only way to connect with that power is to surrender to it. When we begin to adapt the attitude that not my will but thy will be done, then you're allowing that higher presence to gradually come into your experience. And this was the message of the ancient scriptures is that real religion, what true religion means, is to actually experience God. It's not enough just to go to church or to be good or to try to be a nice person, but God is an actual reality that can be experienced, and this is what religion is the attempt to reconnect with that reality so that it becomes our living experience. As soon as you do that, even in the smallest way, then that reality becomes a presence in your life. It becomes an actual experience in your life, and you find yourself being totally fulfilled. Yeah, we've often mentioned before how everybody in this world is searching for happiness. If you ask what the purpose of life is, what they're trying to do, they're searching for happiness, and they're trying to find it in all sorts of different ways. Thinking that more money will make me happy, being famous will make me happy, the right relationship will make me happy, and like that they're searching the world. Where am I going to find my happiness? But in all the spiritual teachers will tell you first, that the happiness is within you, and that's the only place you can find it. Outside, we can get a little joy if we succeed at something. You know, we succeed at one of our projects or fulfill one of our desires, we get a little uplift, and we get some sort of temporary happiness. But then pretty soon that fades away. You know, they've done studies on people who have won the lottery. You know, suddenly they've got all this huge amount of money. And what they found is that after a couple of years, there's like a burnout there. The sense of, okay, so what? You know, what good is it? And like that, whatever we get in the world, it'll give us a little uplift, but then it becomes normal. And it no longer gives us that kind of joy. Yes, like it's sometimes mentioned that if somebody from the Middle Ages was to come here today and see that all we have to do is flick a switch on the wall and we have light. We don't have to light torches or go through all that. They would think, oh, you must be in heaven. This is the most amazing, magical thing. But for us, how much happiness do we get out of a light switch? It's a convenience. It saves us from a lot of hassle and things, but basically it doesn't really bring us a great deal of joy. And so, like that, the happiness we get into the world, it brings some joy, some satisfaction. It removes some of our suffering, some of our difficulties, but it's never really satisfying. But on the other hand, as soon as you get even the smallest little bit of sense of this higher presence, then you start to feel this is good. You know, we read accounts in our previous class, meditation, about different realized souls. They're kind of ordinary people, but who had attained realization. And one of the things they almost all said was, you realize everything's okay, everything's fine, I'm fine, the world's fine, everybody's fine. And that sense of just satisfaction, of being, yes, things are good, and I'm happy, that type of thing comes only from within yourself. As long as you're depending on somebody else or something else to supply that happiness to you, then you tend to get frustrated. And see, and this happens a lot in relationships. We meet someone and we're infatuated and they give us great joy. And so we say, oh yes, I love that person. But then when that person gets cranky and starts being a nuisance and bothering us, that same thing that we were calling love becomes anger and becomes frustration and eventually hatred. And this is why whenever somebody gets murdered, the first place they look is the husband or the wife. So like that, we whatever joy and things, as long as we're depending on it. Now see, this is the problem, is that in normal relationships, human relationships, it's a mixture of attachment, which means this person makes me happy, so I grab hold of them. I want to enjoy this person. Along with that, in most relationships, there's also an element of love. Now, true love is not what makes me happy, but what makes you happy. And that love, a genuine love, is always beneficial. It's beneficial to you, and it's beneficial to the other person. When a person senses that we're depending on them for something, that we're after them for something. They tend to put up subconsciously, but they'll put up barriers. There's a separation. It's like a panhandler on the street. You kind of set a barrier between it. But when a person can sense that you're not asking anything from them, you don't need anything, you're not demanding anything from them, you're just giving. And this is a transformation that begins to take place as we grow spiritually. Instead of approaching life as a getter, trying to get as much happiness and pleasure and satisfaction as we can out of life, we gradually realize, oh, I got it. I'm fine. Everything, I've got what I need. And then we begin to become a giver. Because when we begin to sense this wonderful reality within ourselves, we then begin to appreciate how other people don't have that, how much they're struggling, how much they're suffering in life. And so then there's a compassion, willingness to serve and to just give whatever we've got. And this is kind of an essential part of spiritual life. Because as Swami Vivekananda said, that God is pure unselfishness. God, Brahman, he doesn't need anything from anybody. He's got the whole universe, but all he does is give. He just projects and gives, and that, as a person becomes spiritual, he becomes more like that. Instead of saying, I need this, I need that, now he realizes, oh, I don't need anything. I've got everything, and now I just can give whatever I have. And this is all based, and ultimately all ethics and morality is based on the understanding that really it's the one self. There's only one self there. The self, the consciousness that's within me, that same consciousness is within everybody else. And as we become unselfish, we're gradually moving into that state of consciousness. And we're gradually growing and expanding. So this is what has been stressing the last few verses in the previous chapter 2, is the idea of the concept that is one consciousness that is there within each and every thing. So whatever is in this world has come from prana. In other words, Brahman associated with Maya, its own power. Again in prana, all this rests and functions. This Brahman is like a thunderbolt about to strike. It is a great terror. Those who know this Brahman become immortal. So that Brahman is the root of everything has already been stated. Everything in this world is from Brahman, in Brahman, and under Brahman. We see so much activity in this world. What provides the energy for all this activity? Brahman. A simile is given here to illustrate how Brahman inspires and controls everything. Brahman is like a tyrant, making everything function according to its whims. It is like a king who holds a thunderbolt in his hand, ready to strike if there is any negligence of duty. It is a great terror to everyone. But those who know the supremacy of Brahman as the creator and controller of everything attain immortality. This verse, along with the preceding one, stresses the reality of Brahman. There must be something real behind this phenomenal world. So as Brahman, when it gets connected with prana, or energy, or Maya, it becomes then the creator. Now in our experience in human life, everything we get, everything we achieve or accomplish, we usually have to do through a great deal of struggle. We have to work very hard, we have to overcome all kinds of obstacles and problems and difficulties, and eventually attain success. But hardly, practically everything involves a great deal of work and effort on our part. On the other hand, Brahman creates just by saying, let it be. In the Bible, they speak of what they call the fiat, meaning, let there be light, and there was light. In other words, whatever Brahman projects, it just automatically becomes reality because he's the only power, the only being in the universe. And so Brahman is the one power operating behind all the universe that we see. And that power in the universe is called prana, energy, life force. Now, that life force, that creative power is what keeps us operating. It keeps us alive, keeps us functioning. But we're all operating from one power. Some of us may be very highly qualified, very capable, very powerful individuals, but yet we all are connected to the one source of power. Through ego, we say, "Oh, I'm so important. I'm so intelligent. I'm so strong. I'm such a charismatic person. I'm such a wonderful being." That through ego we say, "Oh, yes." We take credit for all this and say, "Yes, I'm really a wonderful person." But actually, the credit goes to prana. Now it's a universal force. It's like electricity. You have electricity throughout the whole universe. It's one of the basic forces in nature. It's everywhere throughout the universe. But in order to be useful, the first thing you have to know how to kind of harness it and be able to plug into it. And this is why we have our outlets, all around the room. That universal, all-pervasive electricity is harnessed, and then we're able to plug into it through an outlet. In the same way, through spiritual practices, meditation and things, we're gradually able to plug in to that universal cosmic force, and it then begins to flow into us. And in the Bible, Christ mentioned the fact that those people who don't connect with God, who don't connect with Spirit, they're like the branch cut off from the tree. It just withers and dies. When the branch is connected with the tree, however, then it's full of the life-giving sap that's flowing into the tree and flowing through it, and it blossoms. It grows wonderful fruit and everything else. And so individually, when we shut ourselves off, when we cut ourselves off from the divine presence behind, then we like the branch that's cut off from the tree, gradually will wither and die. We may start out with a good kind of storehouse of energy, a storehouse of abilities and talents and capabilities, but gradually, as we get older, we see all of that is kind of waning, kind of going down. I often say, that in youth, when we're young, we feel, "Oh, I can do anything." There's so much energy and possibilities there, but the older you get, the more you realize, I can't quite do anything anymore. When I was 16, I could drive for 16 hours straight and enjoy it. Now, I don't enjoy it at all, and I can barely get out of the car, afterwards. So like that, we see ourselves kind of getting more and more limited. Swami Ashokananda, our Swami in San Francisco, he mentioned how he used the example that if you're in a room and suddenly the walls begin closing in on you, how would you feel? But this is what life is like. We start off in a big room, but as we get older and older, when we were younger, we had all the opportunities in the world. Oh, I can do this, I can be an astronaut, or I can do that. But soon, eventually, we find ourselves in a job. And every day, we're commuting to work, we're coming home, we're commuting back and forth, and we're stuck. We have to show up at that job every day, in all of our opportunities and possibilities. It's all narrowed down into one little group, right? What they call the rat race. And so, like that, the walls of our room, they're gradually coming in, getting closer and closer, and we're getting tighter and tighter squeezed. But when we begin to expand out of it, move out of the room, out of this kind of individual existence that we're living, then you discover that, you can expand to the whole universe. There's no limit to what's there. Joel Goldsmith, in his book, parentheses in eternity, he used the example of the chicken. A little chicken, baby chicken, is egg. That little chicken, all it knows is the egg. All it knows is the darkness and the very limited kind of place it finds itself in. But he said at some point then, the little chick, it begins to peck on the egg. And it pecks and pecks. Eventually it cracks it open a little bit, begins to see some light coming in, and then eventually it breaks out of the egg altogether, and it discovers there's a whole vast world there. And not just my little dark confined space, there's actually a whole vast world here. In the same way, as human beings, as spiritual beings, we have the capacity to kind of break out of our personal small egg and discover that, oh, I'm actually one with the whole universe. There's a whole vast areas of reality that I didn't have any idea existed. And this is like the spiritual journey. It's called going from glory to glory. At this point, we're in a certain state of consciousness. We have a certain experiences, and maybe we're happy with life. We're enjoying it. We're finding it okay. But then you take a step up higher, and you just go, oh, there's something better here. There's something really much better than where I was before, and like that is over and over and over. Because God is infinite, there's no limit to what we can actually experience. You know, Sri Ramakrishna was one of the greatest mystics of all times, person tremendous spiritual experience, but yet he would always insist that you can never limit God. You can never say, okay, he's just this here. There's always something more. And you say that every day I learn something new. Every day some new experience comes. So like that, we have this whole vast universe to explore. And once we kind of begin to break out of our egg, we see that gradually we start to grow into our true nature, which is and always is the divine child of God. Of the very nature of God, of always with God, always united with God, we find ourselves getting back into our true kind of state of existence. So you have the one universal power operating. The more we can plug into it, connect with it, the more it begins to function in us. The more, however, the more selfish we become. The more driven by our own personal desires we become, the more that flow is cut off. It's like God is there with infinite power, ready to kind of flow through us, but then we grab hold of it and we say, no, I'm going to make $1 million with this. And then it just narrows down and the flow stops. When the ego steps in and says, no, I'm in charge, I'll take care of this, then the flow of God's grace, it stops. And God says, okay, you take care of it. It's like the mother is trying to vacuum the carpet, and the little child goes, oh, let me do it. Well, the mother knows the child can't do it, but she says, okay, you go ahead, and lets the child vacuum. So like that, God says, okay, you want to play, go ahead and play, and leaves us alone. And so like that, but then we shut out that whole divine reality that's there, that's always ready to take care of us, or look after us, give us what we need, and everything. We shut that out, and then we live our kind of a finite existence. But when we begin to become unselfish, when we begin to take the attitude of not my will, but thy will be done, then we're opening ourselves up, and now God's grace, it can begin to flow into us. And and we find ourselves being uplifted, transformed, and changed by His presence, and everybody around us gets uplifted too. The person who's found some of the light, he sheds that light on everybody he meets, because it's the nature of light to shine. And so like that, we can become as small as we want, as limited as we want, or we can open up until we become as infinite as Brahman itself. Now when you're able to, like I said, there's one universal force, one universal power there that all things kind of are running on. But then each individual according to our nature, will express a certain activity, a certain operation, a certain nature. You know, when I first came to Vedanta, came to the center, I had the idea that all saints, all spiritual people were pretty much alike. They'd all be humble and pious and this and that. Then you find that they've got their own definite personality. And it's, as you listen to all the different Swamis that come here and speak, the core message is always the same, the basic Vedanta, but they each gives their own kind of personal slant to it. And Swami Krishna said that a daisy, when it attains perfection, it becomes a perfect daisy. It doesn't become a rose. You know, it doesn't become something else. And so we as individuals, as we begin to attain perfection, we will express or manifest what we are built to express. And so each and every individual in this universe is actually operating on that one energy, but each is like a different thought in the mind of God, and we all have different qualities, different abilities to express. Now normally, we look out at the other people and we judge, and we say, oh, this quality is good, this person is good, this person is bad. But in truth, it's God manifesting in all kinds of different ways, and when a person becomes truly spiritual, he sees everything as wonderful. It's like you go to a movie and you don't say, oh, the hero, oh, he was really good, but the villain, he was really bad, and I don't like him at all. You just say, okay, it's a movie. It's actually each one was playing their role, and often in drama, the villains are the most interesting characters, you know, of all. So, like that, each of us, each individual, we're all playing our role. The more we kind of are connected to God, the more we'll play our role the way we're supposed to, instead of fumbling around, you know. But in that way, we'll always be ourselves, but we will be growing and fulfilling ourselves. And you find that, and this is nothing that Advaitins or realized soul, somebody who's kind of will say, is that as you become truly spiritual, that all your actions, all your words, everything is done spontaneously. Normally, we go into a situation, and a part of our mind is saying, well, what should I say now? You know, and then another part is worrying, does this person like me? And all like, we're bringing all of our mind and thoughts and worries and emotions, we're bringing into situations, and then trying to do something, accomplish something. But as a person gets back into balance, back into a kind of proper state, you'll find a situation comes and you just spontaneously will say the right thing, do the right thing, and without bringing in your personality and all your thoughts and worries and fears and all these other things, it just flows out of you. And gradually you realize that you can just sit back, relax, just kind of watch the drama go on, and things will work out. Things will unfold. And this is what's really going on. Everything is unfolding in the mind of God, but we then are kind of loading ourselves up with tons of stress and anxiety, and I've got to accomplish this, and now this is the age of the to-do list. Everybody's running around all day long with a whole list of things. Oh, I got to do this, and like that, you get always under pressure. But actually, when you start to get your balance back and start to get this sense of surrender to God, then the pressure leaves, and you realize the jobs will get done. They'll get done wonderfully well, but you don't have to worry about it and get anxious and keep forcing yourself, oh, now I've got to do this and now I've got to do that. It just automatically begins to unfold. So there's only the one power, and that power has its source in Brahman. So then verse 3, it says that from fear of it, Brahman, fire gives heat. Out of terror the sun shines. Afraid of it, Indra, Vayu, and the fifth, death, rush to perform their respective duties. So fire, the sun, Indra, the god of rain, Vayu, the god of air, and Yama, the god of death, All these are powerful deities. Yet they are nothing compared to Brahman. They are totally dependent on Brahman. The idea that Brahman is almighty is again being stressed. So Yama is fifth in the order of deities mentioned in the verse. Agni, Surya, Agni the god of fire, Surya the god of sun, Indra the king of the gods, Vayu the god of wind, and Yama the god of death. So then verse 4, it says that if anyone is able to attain the knowledge of Brahman before death, he gets liberation in this very life. Otherwise, he is born again and again in this world and other worlds. So according to this verse, the goal of life is to know Brahman, and it is possible to attain that goal in this very life. Each of us should therefore concentrate on attaining it. What is the result of knowing Brahman? The result is that you see your own self as Brahman, and you also see that your own self is the self of everyone and everything. In other words, you are one with everything. The true object of life is to realize this oneness of things. It is not an intellectual apprehension. It has to be a direct personal experience. And this experience is such that it totally changes your personality. You become a new person altogether. You become a universal person, going beyond the barriers of race, religion, and country. You become Brahman. So anyone who attains this knowledge of Brahman, before death he becomes liberated in life, what's called Jivan Mukti. That even though he's in the world, he's also in Brahman. He's aware of Brahman. And it is important, in the commentary here, it mentions that when a person realizes his self, self with a capital S, the spiritual self, the real self within, when a person realizes Brahman, realizes his real self, he also really becomes one, becomes united with the self of everybody else. And this is the great message of Vedanta, of what it teaches, is that as a human being, as an ego, an individual, we've separated ourselves out from the oneness of things. And we consider ourselves a separate, isolated being, and as such, we might be a good person, a very good person, or we might be a bad person, a very bad person. But either way, we are, even if we're a tremendously good person, they have wonderful qualities, we're still just one small individual doing the best we can in order to help other people or to love other people or to serve them. But when a person becomes realized, then what's there, the consciousness that's there, instead of saying, I'm this person and I'm going to do good for this person over here, the consciousness that's there is now the consciousness that's within the other person. So that he no longer sees, ultimately he no longer sees any difference between this particular body, this particular person, and that particular person. Because it's all expressions of the one consciousness. It's like we're all actors on the stage. In this universal drama, we all think we're only aware of our own particular role and what we're doing in the drama and so forth, and that's where all of our attention is focused. But then a person goes kind of behind the scenes and discovers, oh, there's one consciousness there, one mind, one universal mind, and it's in all the different actors, all the different beings. And now you're living not just as your personal self, living at the personal level, but now you're living with the consciousness that this one self is there within everybody. And you're focusing your attention on that one particular body, that one particular person is no longer, it becomes a great kind of limitation. And you begin to live not as an individual, but as universal consciousness. And what's flowing through you now that you've removed the barriers, is good for everybody. Good for you and good for everybody else, because it's flowing out of that one consciousness. And so this is what mystics, saints, people like that, they're trying to attain, that union with the one reality, the one being. And then, once that's done, then that begins to manifest in the person's life. And this is why you have in saints and all, they can do such wonderful things, is because the one consciousness is doing it. As long as an ego is there. Now a person can do yoga or things and he can get some powers. He might be able to heal people or do this or that, but there's still an ego in charge. And so even though he's through yogic practices, he's developed some sort of charisma or thing, or can read minds or do something, it's still being operated by an ego. And it can still be kind of distorted. Person, it gets a little bit more powerful than the average person, and now he builds a cult. He tracks money, he tracks all these things, and begins to build up his own cult, and gets totally off balance, and throws everybody else off balance too. These are kind of occult, psychic powers, and they're there. They can be attained, but spiritual power is something different, because spiritual power is something that God is operating through the individual. And that power may not manifest as miracles or anything like that, but that power is infallibly good because it's coming out of the wisdom, out of the love, out of the reality of the one consciousness, the one being, and is flowing through without distortion. Without the ego grabbing it and trying to make it do something that the ego wants, is now able to freely flow. And so, when I first came to Vedanta, first started reading about Vedanta and reading about realizing self. This is the goal of religion, is to realize yourself. I come from Catholic background, and the idea is there, well, devotion to God. The God's there, and you're trying to develop devotion to God, and this idea of being devoted to yourself was kind of unimpressive at first, unexciting. But then it is when they talk about self, you've got self with a small s, the individual self, the personal self that we are, but they talk about self as self with a big S. And that self is the self, the universal self. It's the self in everyone. And they call it self often because it's your true self. When you're identified with a personal self, a small, limited human being, you're not your real self. You're forgotten your real self. You lost touch with it, and now you're operating out of your wants and fears and anxieties and all kinds of things. But when you discover your real self, then you discover, that this consciousness, which I truly am, which is my real, the same consciousness is in everybody else. Again, Swami Varadananda said that when a person reaches a stage when he goes beyond the body and also beyond the mind and goes deeper, he discovers a state in which he's pure spiritual consciousness. And he said at that time he discovers that he is pure spiritual consciousness surrounded by a much vaster spiritual consciousness. And the body, mind, that's kind of completely forgotten, completely left behind. But he said then when he comes back to the world after that, then he now knows that, everybody else in this world, that same consciousness is there within them. And the thing that's within me as my deepest self, as my real self, that same self is there within each and every person. No matter how bad, no matter how sick or low down or the person is, that self, that wonderful divine being is there within them. And all of our suffering, all of our problems and difficulties come because we've shut that out. And then we're trying to live an existence separate from God, separate from that reality. And like I said, we get a little happiness or a little unhappiness, success, failure, all these things, but very, very small. But that wonderful, kind of infinite, divine presence, that's there within everybody, and it's the reality, the truth about each person. And so this, as they mentioned, this idea of Brahman being everything, of being the real self. The result is that you see your own self as Brahman, and you also see that your own self is the self of everyone and everything. Which that self, that consciousness, it gets connected to a particular body, particular mind, and now it's got an individual existence. But when that consciousness gets back into, separates out from body, mind gets back into its real nature, then it discovers that it's also not merely the Brahman, but it's also then the self of everyone and everything. In other words, you are one with everything. The true object of life is to realize this oneness of things. And it's important, what it says here is that it's not an intellectual apprehension, it has to be a direct personal experience. And this is all these higher teachings. Ultimately, you can read about them in books or hear talks about them, but it ultimately, only when it becomes an actual experience, something directly experienced, then you get the benefit of it. Up until then, you get some satisfaction, some understanding, some definite help from reading scriptures and so forth. This is very important. It's like reading scriptures, studying, going to classes, things like that. It's like studying the map. If you want to get from one place to another, well, you have to look at the map and figure, okay, this is how I go there. But the map doesn't take you any closer. It just, clarifies, okay, this is how to get there. But then, at some point, you have to make the journey. And at some point, all of the knowledge that you think you know about God and so forth, it has to become a direct experience. And this is what happens, is that after a certain point, through meditation, and as you go on in meditation and spiritual practices and so forth, gradually the truth, the reality, it begins to unfold from within your own being. And it'll unfold things that you won't get out of books, things you can't put into a clear concept or intellectual idea, but it will begin to unfold within you as a sense of, this reality is here, this presence is here. And then that then begins to go kind of deeper and deeper. So this experience is such that it totally changes your personality. No matter, a person may have the darkest sins, be the most awful person in the world, but if he realizes God, he's immediately a saint. He's immediately a sage. He's completely transformed now. As a person, as we go on with kind of spiritual practices and things, we have this all getting better and better, and some days we're getting worse and worse. Like that, we're kind of going along gradually. But when a person realizes this spiritual reality, then he's totally transformed. Because that ego, which was running everything before, and which was saying, I'm better and better, and I'm worse and worse, that ego is now been kind of removed. That barrier has been removed, and now what's there is his true divine nature as the child of God, as the presence, the manifestation of the divine. So it totally changes a person, and you become a new person altogether. You become a universal person, going beyond the barriers of race, religion, and country. You become Brahman. Normally we live in human society, we live with all kinds of barriers. Based on race, on religion. I've been involved a lot in interfaith movement, from going back to the Parliament of Religions and things. And it's interesting that all religions teach peace, love, and brotherhood. Right? All religions have a version of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Yet religions have caused as much bloodshed and misery and torture and all kinds of things in human history as practically anything else. So this is because the human mind is identifying, I'm this particular religion, so I'll go out and I'll exterminate those religions. And like that, we're always finding something. And it's not the problem really of religion so much. It's a basic human nature of dividing things into us and them. As soon as we're in a particular group, whether it's a religion or a political party or a country, we say, okay, this is us. This is my group. This is my family. And then we look outside. Anybody outside the group, we say, well, that's them. And we feel, okay, this is my people. Those are not my people. They're strangers. And so there's a barrier, a difference. And if one of them does something to one of us, then right away the whole crowd, we fight about it. And like that, human society has been going on for time immemorial. I think it's something basic in the kind of human genes. Back in ancient times, when people lived, like in small tribes, and small tribes would be all like one extended family, going on for generations. If somebody else came from another tribe, they were potentially dangerous. They might be an attacker, they might try to steal their hunting grounds or things like that, so they were a threat. And so the community would band together in order to deal with it. Well, that sense of the stranger is a threat is part of human nature. If somebody just dresses funny, we say, well, that person's weird, and we don't want anything to do with him because we don't know what he's like. He's unpredictable. But anyway, this whole basic, so many of our social values are just things that were imposed upon us by society, by our parents, our teachers, our friends, and so forth. All these attitudes came, but they're not based on truth. They're not based on the reality that we're all wonderful spiritual beings. So as a person begins to realize within himself that we are wonderful spiritual beings, all these distinctions between white and black and this race or that race, all these distinctions end. So gradually you end, and instead you begin to feel, the one presence of the Lord is everywhere. Okay, so we'll stop there. You just mentioned these last few verses, and also in the previous chapter, they've been basically emphasizing the idea that there's only one self there. There's only one consciousness, there's only one being, and everything is an expression, a manifestation of that being. We are an expression of that being, but we won't truly realize that until we also recognize that everybody else is an expression of that same being. And a person can get better, can kind of grow along spiritual path, and then get spiritual pride. That, I'm so much better than everybody else, and then start looking down on everybody else. But when you get to the actual spirituality of experiencing this oneness of things, then all those kind of barriers and limitations, they gradually begin to fade away, and instead you live constantly in the presence of God. We have no idea, normally, how even in our ordinary everyday life, how it can be so tremendously transformed, so tremendously filled with beauty, filled with wonder and joy as our consciousness changes. Always we're trying to say, if I had a bigger house, that would be better. But actually, if we were in the right state of consciousness, we would be happy any place, because even the physical experience of things changes, gets transformed when you become spiritual, and everything begins to become magical. This is like for children. The world is a magical place. Everything is wonderful. Everything is just filled with interest and beauty. But as we get older, that gets more and more. You see, children are still fairly close to their true nature. But as we get older, we become more and more kind of earthbound, more and more human, and less aware of our deeper nature. And so the world, it tends to lose its magic as we go along. But that same world which is dull and boring before, it can become filled with wonder if our consciousness changes. And this is what you're trying to do. Okay. So any questions on any?
I have a question. You just mentioned if a person loses his body and mind consciousness, then does such a person exist on earth?
Oh yeah. See the body? Yeah.
Is it like a crazy person? Does it look like a crazy person, that person who loses his body and mind consciousness?
No, he does usually.
Most on the TV,
Yeah.
the evening news, there was a lady who was driving a car with a little child.
Yeah, they're in Washington D.C. Yeah.
Police officer, her household people say that she was acting like a crazy person for some time, and such a person could be dangerous himself, herself, and to the world also.
Mm-hmm.
If a person loses mind, body, consciousness, isn't that true that when a person should be spiritual and do good and be good? That would be much more helpful to the person and to the world, rather than losing one's consciousness completely and acting like a crazy person.
Yeah. No, you see, you're not. You're saying the person is losing their consciousness. Actually, they're gaining their consciousness. What's bad and what happens to people on the spiritual path, doing yoga, things like that, is that the mind, the subconscious mind, it becomes very strong. And the kind of superficial daily mind, it can get overwhelmed by that. Now, what's going there is not Brahman, is not spiritual, it's the crazy mind, coming through. And I said, somebody on the spiritual path, they can go off the deep end and kind of get overwhelmed by this other layers of the mind coming through. But in true spiritual, what we're not saying talking about losing consciousness, we're talking about actually gaining consciousness. And that's something completely different than any mental state or any psychic state. It's spirit. And when that's attained, there's no harm to anybody or anything. And when the person comes back to awareness of the external world, usually he doesn't act crazy as a rule. But through yogic practices, through Kundalini, things like that, a person can get unbalanced and get a little strange, but that's not actually spiritual consciousness. See, spiritual consciousness is something deeper than either the body or the mind. And so, as it's attained, it's what begins to then operate through the person is not the kind of distorted state of mind, but the pure flow of reality, you say. So do you kind of understand that? I said there are many people who have been sincerely on the spiritual path, overdid it through pranayama or different practices that kind of ruined their brain. See, this the other thing is that as a human being, I'm in this world, I'm functioning through the instruments of a body and a mind and a brain. Now, if my brain gets burned out for some reason, I can't function anymore. It's like a person, say, who's had a stroke. His spiritual consciousness is intact, is fully fine, but nothing can express outwards because the instrument that we use to kind of communicate with the world has been kind of ruined. And so, there's different levels, but it's to understand that when we talk about spiritual, we're not talking about mind. Usually mind, mental, is like a step in that direction. As we used to talk in the meditation class, how you have 3 states of consciousness: physical, mental, and spiritual. And we're trying to shift consciousness from physical to mental to spiritual. And at the mental level, you can purify the mind, and the mind gives you wonderful experiences and all, visions or maybe things like that, and maybe good things. But the mind, the brain, and so on, they can also get, and particularly when people experiment with techniques and things, they can actually burn out their nervous system or something, and then the instruments malfunction, but the spirit, the self within, it's still all right. It's still all right. But when you can truly are spiritual, then what happens is you're allowing your true nature to express through the body and mind, and it has wonderful effects, usually both for you and for everybody else. And even though you may not be involved in trying to help the world or do things or lecture or anything else, just your presence, the presence of a God-man in the world, it uplifts everybody because he's in touch with their consciousness and kind of uplifting everything. So is that kind of clear? but there are. And, I mean, I had mental patients tell me, oh, God told me to do this, God told me to do that, but it's just the mind. It's just coming, and the thing is, when you're getting into, and this is the importance of study of this wonderful Vedanta and so forth, is that it clarifies things for you. When a person gets into spiritual practices without knowing what it's all about, it's easy to get deluded, to get drawn off into the subconscious, and pretty soon the subconscious is taken over and doing, and you don't know, or you have what seem to be like psychic experiences or something, and meeting beings of light or things, and a person doesn't know, he gets totally kind of off balance there. But if you're clear on what the spiritual life actually is, and they should get through the Upanishads and then the Gita and so on, then you're not confused. You know, you've got a capacity to evaluate: is this good or is this bad? Yeah. And so that having voices speak to you is not necessarily spiritual. There are cases where the voice is spiritual, you know, but it's often a sign of mental problems, and it can lead to, if you kind of tap into it, accept it, believe it. Oh, God is telling me to do this, now God's telling me, and then you can get in big trouble. Because you're letting go of your conscious reason. And this is Swami Vivekananda. Always emphasizes the importance of reason, of rationality. He said, don't just accept things just because you don't understand them, or because they seem fantastical or something. Always evaluate reason, because that's what keeps you kind of on the steady. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, then tomorrow right now we have Swami Shantarupananda with us. He's the head of the center in Portland. Tomorrow at 11:30 he is going to give a talk over at Hindu Temple. Usually Swami Ishapmananda does that talk once a month, so Swami Shantarupananda, he's going to do that from 11:30 to 12:30 tomorrow. Then tomorrow evening at 6:30 we're going to have our fundraising dinner that everybody's invited to. It'll be music and things and some talk, and Swami Shantarupananda will give a talk on the Swamis, great Swamis he's known in the Ramakrishna order. And so that will be tomorrow. And then Sunday he will give a talk, a regular talk at 11 o'clock on Compassionate Vivekananda. Then in the afternoon at 2:30 we're having our program at University of Chicago. It's a program celebrating Swami Vivekananda's 150th birth anniversary, kind of co-sponsored by us and the university. It's going to be held in Rockefeller Chapel from 2:30 to 5 in Hyde Park. And so that is there. And then we're getting ready for our big celebration in November called Chicago Calling, where we're going to have 50 monks and nuns of the Ramakrishna order coming, devotees from around the world. We were hoping to get 1,500. We're still hoping, but we'll see. Anyway, so we're going to have a big celebration. It's going to be at the Hilton Chicago, and there's flyers and things on all these programs. There's flyers down on the table in the lobby, and so all these things are coming up. But it will be the biggest gathering of Ramakrishna devotees ever held outside of India. And so we're looking forward to. Om Asato Ma Sadgamya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamya Mrityur Ma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, and lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. Om peace, peace,